This video and all other videos on this channel are for entertainment purposes only. The content of this video and all other videos on this channel are the opinions of the creator only and do not constitute legal, trading, investment, or financial advice of any kind. Investing carries a high level of risk and the majority of retail clients lose money. Do not invest any capital unless you understand the risks and you are prepared to lose it all.
Alright, hello and welcome to Camel Finance. I'm your boy Camel, and this week is flying by for me. Today I want to mostly focus on some charts because we've got some interesting developments in Bitcoin, and I think I'm going to call this video something like up only from here, because there's another scenario that I didn't mention yesterday, so I want to run through that one as well. I appreciate, especially if you're newer to trading, having multiple scenarios that you have to entertain and hold in your head all at the same time can be quite frustrating. I know a lot of people just want to be told up or down, but from time to time, and it's not the first time on this channel, there's complexity in the system. And when there's complexity, we have to acknowledge all possible outcomes and then give the market the space to reveal which one of those it wants to do. And then once we know which one, of course, we can back that. So I'm going to spend some time talking about that today. Before we do, I've got a few slides to get into, so without further ado, let's go. I'm starting to see a few people sharing my frustration with the fact people are perpetually calling Altseason the whole way up. This is Bitcoin dominance. If we just forget that this is Bitcoin dominance and it has a history of running up and then breaking back down to the lows, if we just forget that and treat this like a stock or a commodity, then it would be insane to keep trying to doubt a trend so powerful and so clear, right? This is obvious higher highs and higher lows, and therefore it doesn't make any sense if this was a stock or a commodity to try to bet against this. As always though, something as simple as a trend line can really give us an indication of when it is time to change this bias. If we approximately draw something like this underneath Bitcoin dominance, okay, the moment this thing breaks the trend line to the downside on a closing basis, then I think we can actually start to say, okay, here we go, Altseason. Okay, but I just wanted to propose this slightly different way of thinking because I think people treat this thing completely different. But at the end of the day, it's still a chart, right? Like I said, if this was a stock or a commodity, I don't believe anyone would be just looking at higher highs and higher lows and saying, oh, it's going to break down, it's going to break down, it's going to break down, right? No serious trader would behave this way. But I think for some reason, because this is Bitcoin dominance and because people have got a lot riding on this thing breaking down, and because it has a history of kind of waddling up and breaking down, people are assuming that that's going to happen again. But remember, it's still a chart, right? And therefore, we can still do TA on it. And even TA as crayon eating as this simple trend line underneath will actually give you an area on the chart to monitor and look for any signs of potential breakdown and reversal, because all the while it's above support, right? There's no sense in saying it's going to break down because at the moment it's clearly in an uptrend, and therefore to bet against this is to simply be jumping in front of a train, right? That's what you're doing, objectively speaking. Now, again, the moment this thing decides to head down here and break down, then of course we can say, okay, now it's time to entertain some downside. Now we can start to look for lower numbers. But keep in mind, until such time as we get a trendline breakdown, then to keep calling for this thing to break down is literally jumping in front of a train and hoping you're going to be able to stop it. I just wanted to propose this as an alternative way of thinking. By all means, have the expectation that it will at some point break down, okay? It seems, even according to me, silly to expect this thing to just creep its way up to 100, right? I don't think that's even I don't think that's possible, to be honest. Not yet, anyway. But just keep in mind, posting things and commenting all the time and saying, oh, season's around the corner, right? It's just flying a flag to say that you don't know what you're doing. So draw yourself a trend line. The moment it breaks down, then you can come here and start clowning on me and telling me I was wrong and blah, 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 blah. And let's be completely clear and honest and open about this. The moment it breaks down, I will call it as well, okay? I will let you know that there's the breakdown. It's not like I'm going to hide from this. It's not like I have anything to lose or gain, right? I don't really care. But for all you know, this will continue for a number of months more, right? And then maybe it just comes down here and does this, okay? So just keep open to that. Altcoin compression happens to be at a record high, okay? Now, historic compression precedes historic expansion. So this expansion will be unlike anything the market has ever seen. So essentially, the tighter the squeeze, the more explosive the move when it is revealed. Bollinger Bands and volatility compression like this does not predict direction, which means it could break up and it could break down. By the way, this is total market cap excluding Bitcoin. And I know that consensus in the market is that this thing is going to have a historic expansion to the upside. And once again, I still maintain that this is quite a crowded trade. I think too many people are looking for one outcome, and therefore the market, which always moves to harm the most amount of participants, will likely head this way. Objectively speaking, this pattern, here you go, down here that I just showed you, could break either way, up or down, And again, let's be honest with ourselves, okay? Let's be honest with each other. Nobody has a clue. I know everyone has their expectations. I know most people think it's going up. I think it's going down personally, but nobody actually knows, right? We're all just speculating. It's all conjecture. And until the market proves to us one way or the other, then no one is validated or invalidated yet. They will be eventually. As it stands right now, we do have to be open to all possible outcomes. So even though my bias is that this thing is going to break down, I'm still open to seeing it move higher. And I'm just respectfully asking everyone to consider, even if your bias is to the long side, even if you're all in and really need this thing to move to the upside, just be aware there's a non-zero probability this thing could break to the downside. So again, this pattern really could break either way and nobody knows. For example, the Bitcoin act is passed. This is probably going to break down waterfall style. From a macro perspective, without monetary policy aligning, it's difficult to imagine how alts break out in a major expansion versus Bitcoin. It is certainly going to be interesting to watch. This whole thing with monetary policy is Jordan's way of arriving at a similar conclusion to me via a different lens and outlook. So what do I mean by that? I mean, as I'm sure you know if you've been following me for a while, we've seen the prior 3 cycles right translate, and thus, on a balanced probabilities, the 4th one should left translate. However, we already know that that's invalidated, and this 4th cycle is now right translated as well, which means the highest probability setup for the next cycle is left translation and extended bear market. Where left translation does not occur in cycle 4, it tends to show up in cycle 5. There's always a chance Bitcoin is going to be a different beast and is just going to perpetually right translate, but from a cycle perspective, as a cycle trader, my base case is that we are going to get the following cycle out of the 4-year cycle low, left translate, and then correct the entire 20-odd year bull run. And so I've arrived at this conclusion based purely off of cycle theory as a cycle trader. Jordan has a very similar idea, but he has arrived at it through a different lens. He looks at the way monetary policy moves. He looks at things like the Fed cycle, the debt cycle, the QEs, and all of that kind of thing. And he is looking at a very similar shape to be driven by monetary policy. He thinks we're going to climb up here, have a decline at some point, and then have a huge blow off top. And Jordan is referring to that big blow off top as the ultimate top once monetary policy is aligned. Now, if you've been following my work for any length of time at all, you know that out of this 4-year cycle low, I expect record amounts of QE, maybe 2, 3, even 4 times what we saw during the C19 era. And I believe that's what's going to catalyze Bitcoin up to these enormous numbers. So now, having spoken about all of that, let's tie this back into altcoins. What if, okay, monetary policy does not align until that 4-year cycle low in 2026? What if we don't get any kind of printing, any kind of easing style monetary policy until we've seen that 4-year cycle low? And what if, therefore, Bitcoin crabs its way up here, has a decline into that 4-year cycle low, and this actually breaks down? What if they do not perform at all this year until we get to the printing? And then once monetary policy aligns, as Jordan is talking about here, then maybe we can see altcoins and speculation and greed and all of that kind of thing return to the market. So super interesting times. I know people don't really believe me when I say this. I'm honestly rooting for the upside outcome here because I have nothing to lose or gain, right? I don't have a dog in the fight. And I know a lot of people will essentially be bankrupt if this thing breaks down. And I am honestly not cheering on people losing their entire net worth just so I can come back here and say, I told you so. In fact, if it does happen, I can assure you I will have no interest in saying I told you so and dancing on the graves of these dead altcoin portfolios. But I do think this is a very real possibility that we are facing, that this thing will spill into the 4-year cycle low late 2026, and then finally we could perhaps see a handful of the chosen ones do extremely well. One last point to make on alts before I move on is one of the biggest challenges people come at me with for this idea is that human greed is always there, right? Humans will always be humans, they will always be greedy, and therefore we will always see them go and chase these shiny projects and pump and dump these speculative assets and that kind of thing. But the market kind of proved to me that I was right about this idea in this single tweet here, okay? I was getting hundreds of comments when I first went after alts a few days ago, and human greed, as I said, was one of the biggest challenges. People were saying, yeah, you haven't accounted for human greed. The thing Camel misses is a core component is human greed, blah, blah, blah. There was hundreds of comments like this. But the thing I think I know that the altcoiners in general don't know, okay, is that I didn't actually miss greed. I didn't forget to factor it in. I didn't not consider it. Okay, I've been trading a very long time, and therefore I have seen a lot more market tops in all asset classes than most people have. And therefore I know that most market tops actually occur without any greed or euphoria whatsoever. If you've only just come into crypto, you're only looking at things like Bitcoin and altcoin charts, then it's easy for you to fall into this trap of believing all markets top on euphoria and greed, and there's no such thing as a top that occurs quietly. But that's actually not true at all. That's only really true in crypto. Crypto has always been highly speculative, the market caps have always been extremely small, and therefore it's very, very susceptible to big blow-off tops, euphoria, and greed, because the gains can be so enormous, right? You're not going to get 10,000% return in a stock. Certainly not in a couple of years, right? Maybe if you bought Apple or Nvidia in the 90s, you might. But to get those kind of insane returns outside of crypto is simply impossible, right? And therefore, if you only just come into this space and that's all you know, your entire paradigm is that a market only tops on euphoria and greed. But as I said, the truth is, most of these people are inexperienced, right? And it's not that I missed greed, it's that everyone else is missing. Most tops happen very sneakily. They happen quietly, no one really detects them. And if you actually had a broader market experience, you would know greed and euphoria and blow off tops are actually very, very rare. And as I said right at the start of this slide here, okay, this tweet cemented to me that there's a very good chance I'm correct about this, because every time I post something kind of half trolling Bitcoin dominance or saying no broad-based alt season, I get hundreds and hundreds of people fire back at me. Okay, this post was total crickets. Nobody had anything to come at me with here, because the truth is, I believe as they were reading this, it suddenly occurred to them for the first time ever, oh, I didn't actually know most tops are sneaky. I didn't know a market could top without euphoria and greed, right? And again, there's no substitute for experience. If you had been trading stocks for a decade and a half like me, if you had been trading commodities for a decade and a half like me, as well as a bunch of other assets, you would have seen the majority of things that top quietly without anyone detecting them. So again, I say this not to come here and try to pee on people's campfire, right? I say this not to try and just invoke reactions and cause chaos and farm comments. I say this because this is how I genuinely see this market playing out. And again, as always, I could be wrong. The moment I'm invalidated, I will come here and tell you I'm invalidated. I will be cheering on people to do well if I'm invalidated. But this is just one of hundreds of calls that I make, okay? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Many of them are as contrarian as this one. Oil, for example, people that have been following me for a long time know I've been one of the only bears out there. There is a handful of bears, right? But most people kept perpetually calling for triple-digit oil and big breakouts. And I was saying, no. Deflation is probably coming, right? We're in disinflation. It's going to keep happening. This call is no different to that, right? I call the market as I see it. That's my job. My job is not to come here and sell you hope. And as always, if I'm wrong, and I'll let you know, okay? But something that people are not acknowledging is the longer this cycle progresses, the more validated this idea is. I cannot move away from it yet because there's no evidence to suggest this is actually an invalidated setup yet. At the lows, people never believed Bitcoin dominance could head for 70%. At the lows, people never believed Ethereum could look like it looks. At the lows, people didn't really think most altcoins would produce new bear market lows. And so fast forward, I don't know, 30 months into the future, something like that from that bear market low call. I can't move away from this and say it's invalidated because it's actually more validated than it was 2.5 odd years ago. And I know the biggest pushback here will be, okay, Camel, well, that just means it's closer than ever. I hope you're right. Genuinely, I hope you're right. But please understand it's my job to come here and present a call on the markets as I see it. And this is just how I see it. This is certainly not the first time in my career that I've been against an extremely one-sided herd. This is certainly not the first time in my career I have seen what I believe to be an extremely crowded trade. And it is simply my job to point at this and say, this is how I see it. And I continue to be more and more concerned that I can see how this is going to play out. Over in the world of Bitcoin, some of the biggest news that we've had in a while, okay, has just been released. Bitcoin has been recognized as a reserve asset by the US housing system, which is a defining moment for institutional Bitcoin adoption and collateral recognition. So you can now use cryptocurrency as an asset for collateral for a mortgage, okay? Wild times. The global M2 fractal is causing a bunch of people to wonder if this thing is actually as powerful as people were led to believe initially. I've long been suggesting that whilst I believe the trend of Bitcoin is up, I don't think we should put as much weight on this fractal as many people do. And we've got a fantastic example here, okay? Because Bitcoin doesn't simply follow M2. There's been 3 instances where M2 rising saw Bitcoin falling due to spikes in bond market volatility, which shows why just follow M2 is a guaranteed way to get wrecked, okay? You can't just use one fractal to allow you to hack the matrix and be the best trader ever, okay? Global M2 in green at the bottom, you can see rising here whilst Bitcoin is in a bear market. Same deal here, rising and spiking whilst Bitcoin is in a bear market. Same deal here, rising whilst Bitcoin had already topped. And then we had the opposite, right? M2 falling, quantitative tightening occurring whilst Bitcoin continued to climb higher. So is this useful or not? I'm not convinced personally, but I'll let you guys be the judge of that. And now just before we move into the charts, I wanted to shout out Big Mike here because I was wondering if it could be this, right? Have we just got an ABC? That's the 2 in, and now we're about to do the 3. I do wonder if this is possible. And if I go straight to the Bitcoin chart, I was talking about this with some of the members, okay, because we originally had the camel indicator pick this low. And if I turn on the unconfirmed lows down the bottom, you can see that it's chosen this low, but then it had to unconfirm it, right? It had to invalidate that low because we got a failed cycle. And a lot of the members were asking me, what's going on here? Like, why has it done this? And I was saying that my best guess is that it's decided to go and hunt for a cycle inversion. And then I woke up this morning and sure enough, there it is, okay? It has decided that may well be seller exhaustion, a half cycle inversion. It's a bit early. And I still think we need to keep all of those scenarios on the table, right? So the fake out failed cycle where there's trades sideways, higher, low and go. I still think we need to be open to that one. I also think we need to be open to this just being a standard normal failed cycle where that was not indeed a fake out failed cycle, but rather a failed cycle. But the camel indicator seems to think, okay, that the low is in, the sellers are gone. And thus, if it is correct, we will get a breakout here and we will go pretty much straight up from here, which would align perfectly with Big Mike's count. So I thought this was the lowest probability outcome. That was until this indicator has picked the low, but now it has picked the low. I'm thinking this may well be the case, right? This may well be the low is in and it could well be time to go to Valhalla. Something else that makes me think this is possible is MSTR is looking to, having confirmed a double bottom with a cycle low, get a breakout and push higher. Coinbase is absolutely ripping to new highs. A bunch of these other stocks are also starting to push higher. So it makes me think there's a very good chance here that this is going to end up being a strange inversion. I know some people are actually counting it as a slightly different count, and they've been making the case that this is actually not an inversion, but rather just an extended and slightly longer cycle. It could be that too. So as you can see, there's a lot of complexity in the system right now, but I think this trend line will certainly help us figure out which of the scenarios we can start to scratch off first. Over in the stock market at least is behaving itself, right? It's a lot easier to deal with. We've got that half cycle low in, we're pushing off. I think we can grab hold of this trend line now and stick it here. Got no problem with that at all. That will give us some early warning signs if things start to go wrong. Of course, it's normal and to be expected to break this temporarily into the cycle low window, so keep an open-mindedness to that. The VIX still getting crushed, right? The VIX doesn't care, doesn't believe any of the headlines or fear, uncertainty and doubt out there at the moment. And gold, I think, maybe bottomed here. Now it's too early, it's certainly not confirmed, but we are due a cycle low. So I think the moment I see a big green candle, that will be enough for me to say, okay, confirmed cycle low. I think by the time the price trades a little bit higher, the camel indicator will pick this one as the low. And then hopefully it should be time to get a big push off there. I'm noticing that silver cycles are playing out much cleaner. Looks like we are going to try to reset this cycle here and then move higher. I also think this might force a slightly early weekly cycle according to the indicator in here, but then I think it's time to go. And as I was talking about with the members, I believe SilJ is leading. I believe that SilJ is going to find the bottom first and break out first, and then we're going to get some exposure there in the level 3 members section. And finally, the chart I'm the most interested in at the moment is the 10-year yield. The chart of truth seems to be heading down, right? Seems to be continuing to the downside, and this means that I don't have to go back to the drawing board and put on additional scenarios on the table. We can just kind of sit here, take it one day at a time, allow the wobble to occur, and as long as it continues down, then happy days, right? Things are still going according to plan. So I'm your boy Camel. I hope you're doing well in life. I hope you consider what I said, and until next time, take care from me. All the best. Cheers. Bye.
Camel Finance, he's the man to see, rocking the markets with his contrarian spree. Trades like a pro, no fear, no shame, sticking to his guns in his money game.